exactly. A parallel line has the exact same slope as the original line. So those two should be easy. Now the perpendicular line, I want to take the opposite reciprocal of my original slope. So opposite means you change the sign, and reciprocal means you flip the fraction over. So remember this -2, we could really think of as -2 over 1. You don't necessarily have to write it that way, but it makes it easier to think about down here. So if I want the reciprocal, that would be 1 over 2, and then I want to make it positive so that it's the opposite. So this would be 1/2. Okay. The x-intercept, there's really no easy way to get the x-intercept, especially when it's in slope-intercept form. My only choice here is to plug 0 in for y. At the x-intercept, you always know that y is equal to 0. So you can always take that approach. I think what I will do here is I will show how to work that out separately. So I'm going to take that y equals 2x minus 10, negative 2x plus 10, and put a 0 in for y. So that'll look like this. 0 equals negative 2x plus 10. And once you're able to do that, we need to solve this equation. So I would subtract 10 and subtract 10. I end up with negative 10 equals negative 2x. Divide by negative 2, and I end up with x equals 5. So that means my x-intercept back on my chart is 5. Okay, let's look at the second one. The second one is in standard form, which looks like this. ax plus by equals c. And hopefully you can see the difference between number 1 and number 2, what those equations look like. This one has the x and the y together on one side. Okay? This one's slope is a little bit trickier. And it really just means we have to use this formula, and I gave it to you up here at the top of the table. If your equation is written in standard form, then to get the slope, you're going to do the negative a over b. And a is the number in front of x, and b is the number in front of y. So this would be negative, and then I would do 4 over negative 5, which hopefully you can see that those two negatives are really going to cancel each other out, and this will just be 4/5. Okay, so your slope there is 4/5. I'm going to take that and run down here to parallel line, because I know that those answers would be exactly the same, 4/5. And then to do the opposite reciprocal, I'm going to flip that over and make it negative, so it would be negative 5/4. So I would always start with those just so you don't get mixed up on which numbers you should be looking at when you go down here to your parallel lines. You always want to be looking back at the slope and not the intercepts. Okay, to do the y-intercept, I want to plug a 0 in for x. So in this equation, negative 8, some of you are probably able to do that piece of it in your head too. If you are, that's terrific. When I go to do the x-intercept means I'm going to put a 0 in for y. So you're always putting 0 in for the opposite letter. So 4x minus 5 times 0 equals 40. Well, this is really just going to cancel out, so I'm left with 4x equals 40. Divide by 4, and I'm left with x equal to 10. So my x-intercept in this one is 10. Okay. Let's take a look at number 3. Number 3, you are missing an equation, but I see here that I am given the slope and the y-intercept. And if I'm given the slope and the y-intercept, the easiest thing to do would be to write my equation in slope-intercept form, because the slope is just my m, and the y-intercept is my b. And if you don't remember, slope-intercept form is written up here for you. Y equals mx plus b. So my equation is just y equals 2/3 x minus 6. And if I know my slope is 2/3, I can jump down to the end here. I know this is also going to be 2/3. And then my opposite reciprocal would be negative 3/2. Again, the x-intercept is going to require a little bit more work. At the x-intercept, you always, always, always know that y is equal to 0. So I'm going to take that equation that I have. Use some space up here. I'm going to take that equation that I have and put a 0 in for y. So I would write 0 equals 2/3 x minus 6. Let's add 6 on both sides. So I end up with 6 equals 2/3 x. Now my recommendation for getting rid of a fraction is always to multiply by the reciprocal. So I would multiply by 3/2 and multiply by 3/2. Okay? That's going to cancel these out. And this is going to be 3 divided by 2 times 6 is going to be 9. So my x-intercept there is 9. Some of you like to try to divide by these fractions. Like in this problem, when you get to this 2/3 x equals 6, some of you are going to try to divide by 2/3. That's perfectly okay, but in your calculator, when you do 6 divided by 2/3, you need to make sure the 2/3 is in parentheses. Okay, so be careful of that. Okay, the fourth one. The very first thing I notice in number 4 is that there is no x. There's only a y. So I can, just to make this look a little nicer, I can divide both sides here by 3. And that leaves me with just y equals 7. So the equation I'm really looking at here is y equals 7. Think about what kind of line that's going to be if it only has a y in it. This is saying that we cross the y-axis at 7 and that we never ever cross the x-axis. If there's no x in the problem, then there's no x-intercept. So think about what kind of line would not cross the x-axis. That would be a horizontal line. And a horizontal line always has a slope of 0. So anytime you just have y equals a number, your slope is 0. That means my parallel line has a slope of 0. And then if you were to take 0 and flip it over, let me show you this quick. If you think of 0 as 0 over 1 and you do a reciprocal, you're going to end up with 1 over 0. And remember that we're not allowed to divide by 0. So this right here is undefined, which we can use that symbol, the circle with the slash through it. So right here, if my line has a slope of 0, the perpendicular line would be undefined. Now this one, number 5, tells me right off the bat that I have an undefined slope and that I have an x-intercept of -2. Well, think about what kind of line has an undefined slope. Hopefully you remember that vertical lines have an undefined slope. And for a vertical line, my equation is just going to look like this. It's just going to be x equals some number. So look at what your options are here. What number would x always have to equal? Hopefully you land on this. My equation is x equals -2. Okay? And if I don't have a y in my equation, then I don't have a y-intercept. So this should be none. Again, that's different than 0. That's different than undefined. You just don't have one. If this slope is undefined, then my parallel line is undefined. And this one works a little bit backwards from the one up above. Remember, 0 and undefined are opposites. So if this is undefined, this one is 0. Okay. Number 6. Number 6, the problem with number 6 is that right now it's not in any form that we recognize. It's not in slope-intercept form, and it's not in standard form. So we need to get it into one of those forms before we can really go any farther. So I'm going to take this equation and I'm going to simplify it a little bit. So I have y minus 4 equals -2 times x plus 1. Let's distribute this negative 2. So I would end up with y minus 4 equals negative 2x and then minus 2. And from here, it kind of depends which form you're more comfortable with. I would bet slope-intercept form is going to be the easiest way for most of you to go. So I would take this 4 and move it over so that the y is by itself. You could choose to move this into standard form if you wanted, which means you would move the x over with the y, and then you would move the 4 over with the 2. So you have your x and your y over here, and then your regular numbers over here. Either way you go, you should be able to do the rest of the problem. Let's take and add 4, and add 4. And that's going to give me y equals negative 2x plus a positive 2. So I'm just going to go back to number 6 here. I'm just going to cross that equation out, and I'm going to write in the one that we just came up with. Y equals negative 2x plus 2. That equation now is in slope-intercept form. So again, my slope and my y-intercept should be super easy to find. My slope is just the number in front of x, so it's negative 2. And my y-intercept is just positive 2, the plus 2 on the end there. Okay. Oh, and look, they even gave us that the parallel line slope was negative 2, so that's a great way for us to check that we were right. Our slope should match this. So they match, that means we're in good shape. And then the opposite reciprocal of negative 2 would be 1/2. Now from here, to get the x-intercept, we're going to need to plug 0 in for y. And you could have done that in the original equation if you had really wanted to. If you wanted to say 0 minus 4 equals all this, you could. Now we've already done a lot of the work here to get this simplified, so I'm just going to plug right into this equation. I'm going to say 0 equals negative 2x plus 2. I'm plugging 0 in for y, and now I'm solving. So negative 2 equals negative 2x. I've run out of room at the bottom of my paper, but we should be able to divide both sides by negative 2 and get that x is equal to positive 1. So if x is equal to positive 1, that means my x-intercept is positive 1. Okay, number 7. Number 7, the only information I'm given about slope is that the perpendicular line is negative 4. So I want you to think, when we go from slope to perpendicular, we do the opposite reciprocal. So basically I want to flip that back on itself. And the opposite of the opposite would just be the opposite again. Okay, if I wanted a reciprocal, I would just flip it again. So I'm going to do the opposite reciprocal of negative 4, which is positive 1/4. And that means that this parallel line is also going to be positive 1/4. And now again, I have a slope and I have a y-intercept. So I'm going to plug this into this y equals mx plus b form that I used up here. So y equals 1/4 x plus 5. And again, to get the x-intercept, I'm plugging 0 in for y. So I'm going to take that equation that I just came up with. Excuse me while I find some blank space on this paper. I'm going to take that equation that I just came up with and put a 0 in place of y. So negative 5 equals 1/4 x. Now what I would do is multiply by the reciprocal, which is 4 over 1, or you could just do 4, because 4 over 1 is the same as 4. This is going to give me negative 20 equals, these cancel, so negative 20 equals x. That means my x-intercept of this line is negative 20. Okay. And the last equation, y equals 3/2 x. This almost looks like slope-intercept form, except I'm missing whatever is over here. Well, if there's nothing there, that's like a 0. Okay, so y equals 3/2 x plus 0. My slope would just be the m, which is 3/2. That means my parallel line slope is also 3/2. And the opposite reciprocal would be negative 2/3. Now let's talk about intercepts. Some of you should be seeing right away that the y-intercept is 0, just because of the way we wrote this out. But if you weren't sure about that, we could do the same thing we've done for every other problem. If I'm looking for the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So that would be y equals 3/2 times 0. Well, anything times 0 is just 0. So y would equal 0. So my y-intercept is 0. Now we've talked in class about what we know. If we know the y-intercept is 0, that means that it crosses right at the center of the graph.
Please come to the athletic office. Robert Van Acker, please report to the athletic office.
Excuse that. Sounds like a great extra credit question, by the way. Who did they call to the office in the middle of Mrs. Torigno's video? If we know the y-intercept is 0, that means that my graph must be crossing right at the origin. So the x-intercept would have to be 0. But if you think you're going to forget that, just fall back on what you always know. You always know you can plug in 0 for y. So in this original equation, y equals 3/2 x, I would say 0 equals 3/2 x. Then to get rid of the 3/2, I would multiply by the reciprocal. Or you could divide. Either way, it's going to come out the same way. Okay, so those cancel. And 2/3 times 0 is just 0. So again, my x-intercept would be 0. Okay. So there you have it. There's the table for your quiz review. Hopefully that all made sense. If you do have some questions, we will take some time at the beginning of class tomorrow to go over this. And I also recommend, if you're getting comfortable with your calculator, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to type in an equation like number 1. After you've done all of this work, type in the equation and just check for yourself. Does it look like the y-intercept is at 10? Does it look like the x-intercept is at 5? Does it look like it has a slope of -2? These are all things that you can just kind of double check visually on a graph. Okay? Alright, I will start a new video with the back side of this sheet in just a moment.